So this is our third video of our modernism project, and in this video starts our post-reading video about what we've read about from our author, John Steinbeck. And in our book, our Glencoe literature book, we've decided to look up the story called Breakfast. It's later in the book, but it's created by Steinbeck to show the kind of the hardships and the impact of the Great Depression on people. And the story is about it opens up with a woman who is nursing her child, and it talks about a man who comes into this camp where this woman is taking care of this child.
She's preparing breakfast of bacon and biscuits.
And there is also a man and what we analyze as his father, who come out of this tent, who have washed, bathed, and clothed themselves for the day's work. And they greet the man with kind of open arms feeling, where it's a nice, warm, family-like feeling, and they allow him to eat breakfast with them. And they do talk. They talk about their new clothes that the men have just bought, and how it's a small thing, but it's got great meaning into it. As I mean, these are poor working men who live in a tent with a wagon, and they're trying to support each other with the few provisions that they have. And it goes on with the men asking the stranger if they want to work with them and make a living and kind of live with them and help just get through this tough time. And he declines, and he continues on his journey. So that's about the summary of the story.
And through reading this story, we can determine that even through the difficulties of the Great Depression, people were willing to go out of their way to help others that were in need, even though they themselves were not very well off. Like these two men offered breakfast to the stranger, and with nothing that they would get in return, and just an offer of kindness, which really showed that even through difficult times, people still have a good heart. For this section of our video, we used sources from our literature book. It was Breakfast by John Steinbeck on page 866, and we also used Bloom's Literary Reference Online, and that source was called Breakfast, and that was by Jeffrey Schultz.
Thanks for sticking by. This is our fourth video of the Modernism Project, and we will talk about the characteristics of breakfast and the Modernism writing period.
First of all, you see imagery throughout this piece of literature. And the first quote that we have is, "I find myself recalling it again and again, each time bringing more detail out of a sunken memory." This is in the very beginning of Breakfast, and it's talking about how John Steinbeck is looking back upon his memory, and he's catching an image in time in his past where he remembers more and more vividly every time he thinks about it. And this is very common of the Imagist movement of modernism period, so this classifies it as what he is often seen having. And throughout the piece, there's also imagery that is used, a lot of descriptive words, as in the sunrise in the morning and the mountains behind them,
and also about the coldness of the morning and how it affects him. Like talks about him being really cold, but not cold enough that he's freezing, just cold enough that he rubs his hands together and he's sticking them in his pockets trying to stay warm, and he's shuffling around. And also, after imagery, we also have symbolism that also pairs along with imagery. And our next quote that simplifies symbolism: "The girls spoke from the stove. They even got new clothes. The two men looked down at their new dungarees, overalls, and they both smiled a little." The symbolism of the dungarees being new symbolizes that these men are poor, but yet it symbolizes hope. That even through a lot of work and a lot of labor, they can still get new things, and they can still trek on. Again, this story is shown through the Great Depression, where people don't have money, and in the story, as they're sharing a lot of things with a stranger, they look at their new dungarees, and it's kind of a a wake-up call, saying that they just need to keep going forward, and they will get rewards out of this, and their lives will improve gradually but slowly as they just continue to work. So.
And this also characterizes modernism because of the disillusionment that's also seen throughout it. And even though it's not as obvious because it seems like a more happy story, it's still apparent because they are in this condition where they are poor and this family doesn't have very much. And since it is harvesting season for cotton, they have a little bit more and they get to share that with a stranger. And John Steinbeck really, he put a lot of unique characteristics of modernism through here in the imagery and the symbolism used throughout.
So for our fourth video, our sources were from the book titled Breakfast by John Steinbeck, page 866. And then our second source was from Bloom's literary criticism source called Breakfast by Jeffrey Schultz. This is video 5 of our modernism project. So our next point that we're trying to talk about is the writing style. Just what makes up the story, like what is it made up of. This story is a short story compared to a poetic kind of writing style that most authors would use during the modernism. But along with the poetic kind of form, we have a very detailed story, and the detail really goes far with the imagery and the symbolism, and that ties in with the modernism characteristic aspect of this period. It is not a poet, as you will well know, so it doesn't have any form of rhyme scheme or any specific scheme that it's trying to use, but it's very detailed.
Steinbeck used quite a bit of dialogue through here to convey the different people's feelings, like between the two men and the woman and her child. You could tell that there was the woman respected the men because they were just her actions and how she remained silent when she was around them and only spoke when she was spoken to, and along with the stranger, how he respected them also. And it's just how Steinbeck wrote this, it's apparent that he put in a great detail of how he used his writing style to benefit this piece of work. For this section of our video, we used sources from the book again, Breakfast by John Steinbeck, and we also used Bloom's literary reference online, and that was also the article Breakfast by Jeffrey Schultz.
Hello again, this is our last and sixth video for this modernism project. Our last topic will be the comparison, and we're also putting in a couple of differences between the writing style of the modernism period and with past periods, which we'll be using rationalism and regionalism. Regionalism is similar to this period with the descriptions and the details given in each poetry or short story, whatever you're reading from any author. There's a lot of details, just a lot of images that one can relate back to what's going on during this specific time period.
Yeah, and Steinbeck specifically used this in his writing, and he wrote about the similarities of how he didn't hide what was really going on in the world, like realism was regionalism, and realism told about what really happened. They didn't try to hide the bad stuff. They showed both the bad and the good in their stories. And they both had a similarity where they didn't really consider people good or bad. It was somewhere in between. And this is seen through the story that Breakfast, where the men help out a stranger, and they had no reason to because they were pretty poor themselves.
And then rationalism. There's pretty steep differences because of especially the details. In Breakfast, there's not exactly specific facts that back up the depression, like the hardships. It doesn't specifically give just real details of like this is the depression, this is what's going on, what's happening. It's not exactly stating what it's representing, but we can see that through the images. And that's one big difference is with the rationalism, there's specific facts given to describe something or to represent something that you're trying to talk about.
Steinbeck used a lot more emotion rather than logic and reasoning, and that was very common throughout the modernism period.
For our last video, our sources were again from the book. The article is titled Breakfast by John Steinbeck, page 866. And then our last source was from Bloom's Literary called Realism and Naturalism in American Literature by Edward Quinn.